In this video I'm going to show you how to replace a factory mechanical switch in the Razer Orbweaver with a Cherry MX switch, as well as also showing you how to replace the LEDs if you want to customize the LED colours. It's a miserable, wet, rainy day outside, so that means it's the perfect day to be inside the workshop and finally a good reason to finally get around to changing one of the mechanical switches on my Razer Orbweaver here. Now, bear in mind when you're watching this tutorial on how to change one of the switches out, bear in mind I have not actually taken apart a Razer Orbweaver just yet, so there might be some mistakes along the way, but hopefully if I do make any mistakes you can learn from them and then avoid them when you go to change out one of the switches on your Razer Orbweaver. So let's have a look at some of the tools we're going to need. We're going to need some baking paper or wax paper, a couple of screwdrivers. I'm going to be changing out the colour of a couple of LEDs while I'm at it, just to add some customization to my Razer Orbweaver. Of course, we're going to need the replacement switches. Now these are genuine Cherry MX blue switches. I got these from maxkeyboard.com. There'll be a link in the video's description. And we're going to need a keycap puller. These can be purchased for a couple dollars off eBay, or if you're like me and have a 3D printer, you can print one off Thingiverse. We're going to need some solder and a solder sucker or soldering wick, and also a soldering iron. I'm obviously using a soldering station here, which has the advantage of being temperature controlled. However, for what we're going to be doing, it's not too crucial to have an expensive soldering station at all. So our first job is to remove all the keycaps from the switches using our keycap puller. So you can set those aside for the moment, and we're going to bring in our wax paper here. Now the rear rubber pads on the bottom of the Razer Orbweaver, they're all mounted onto a plastic cap which just snaps into place, and we can just pull that off with our fingers, and that exposes all the screws underneath. The front rubber pads are held on by adhesive though, and we're going to pull these off and stick them down onto the wax paper to keep them as clean as possible, so that we don't have to muck about reinstalling adhesive to stick them back down when we're reassembling the unit. There's also a rubber grommet down in that crevice which hides the screw as well, so make sure to get that one. And we can set those aside for the moment. Now there are plenty of screws on the bottom of the Razer Orbweaver, and not all of them are the same, so make sure you keep track of what screw came out of what hole, otherwise it's going to make reassembly rather tricky. Now, disassembling the Orbweaver was rather a trial and error process. Some of the plastic panels are held on with clips and screws, and basically I kept working my way around the edge of the unit and wiggling parts and panels until something started to move, and at one point soon in this video it kind of all just fell apart after I had given it a long enough time wiggling everything free. So you can see the top cover came off, exposing our PCB with all those switches. So here there's a small ribbon cable. Now to remove this ribbon cable we have to lift up a tab on that clip you just saw me pop off, and then remove the ribbon cable. Be careful not to bend this too much, as ribbon cables are notorious for breaking if they're bent too often. And there's only 2 screws holding in the whole PCB for all the switches. However, there is a couple of little tabs on the side where you can kind of press the tabs out of the way, and then that frees out the PCB board. So we can put the rest of the housing on the side for the moment, and we can have a good look at our PCB and the switches we're going to be replacing. So the first thing we can do is look at how to desolder components. So where I'm indicating now, those solder points are for the LEDs, and these 2 here are for the switches itself. The first thing we should be removing is the LEDs themselves. To do that, I'm going to apply some solder to bridge the 2 connections so I can heat them both up at the same time. Just like that. And then I'm going to take a pair of needle nose pliers and we're going to grip the LED fairly tight, make sure that the pliers don't slip. And then we're going to heat up the joint with our soldering iron while trying to pull the LED out. And once everything gets nice and hot, the solder will release the LED just like that. Next up, we can desolder the switch. Leave your soldering iron on it for a few seconds to get everything nice and warm, and then suck that solder right out of that hole. Do this on the next joint as well. Each switch only has 2 soldering joints to hold it in. And provided you've removed most of the solder, the switch should just pop out just like that. So now it's time we can reinstall our brand new switches. So place it on the PCB and press it down firmly to make sure that it's seated all the way and is mounted correctly onto the PCB. Now you see me kind of tweaking the solder an angle to work with me. I'm just going to tin one of the connections, and once that's solid, we can go ahead and solder the next connection. Next, I'm going to take one of the brand new 3mm LEDs, and we need to pay attention to the orientation when we're reinstalling these LEDs. So down between the switches there's markings on the PCB for positive and negative for the LED, so make sure you get those around the right way. Make sure the LED is seated all the way down into the switch, and then we can go ahead and solder off those connections. And I'm just going to use some flush cut trimmers to cut off the legs of the LED. And there's our PCB with brand new switches ready to be installed. So here's a bit of a reverse process of what we did earlier, only this is of course reassembling, which is always harder than disassembling. However, hopefully with you watching this video you get a fair good idea of how to go about reinstalling it. So the first thing I'm going to do is reinstall the 2 screws and then connect the delicate ribbon cable back up to the PCB. Next up, we can reinstall the top cover, and this has a few clips around the edge to make sure to press firmly and hear those snap into place. Next we can take our wrist rest. Now you can see me just depressing the adjustment lever there. We want to make sure we're pressing that while trying to slide the mechanism back into place. Sometimes it needs a bit of a wiggle, but we got it in there fairly easily. And next up there's this little plate which goes on the side, and this can be a little bit tricky to position just right to get all the screw holes to line up, but it slides in just under the wrist rest there. With a bit of arguing I managed to get it in place and secure it with its 2 screws. Next up I installed the switches, the side switches, and reinstalled those 6 screws, and basically now we've just got to finish going around reinstalling all the screws, making sure that we're putting the right screw back in its original position. So now we're on the home straight, we can reinstall the keycaps and replace the rubber feet on the bottom of the Razer Orbweaver. And the next segment I thought it would be fun to pull apart one of the switches I replaced. So if you lever up the tabs on the side of the switch, basically the whole internal mechanism comes out. Now this does mean if you could find Razer replacement switches, you can in theory replace anything broken inside the switch without having to desolder the whole switch from the PCB, which makes repairs a lot easier. It's also worth mentioning that if you are considering changing the LEDs, or at least buying new ones to install when you've changed a key switch, make sure you get 3mm LEDs that are flangeless. Normal 3mm LEDs that have a flange won't fit and aren't compatible with the key switches here. If you have any difficulty finding them, I purchased mine also from maxkeyboard.com, so they can supply you the switches and the LEDs. So that about wraps it up for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you found it informative, please give it a like, it'd be much appreciated. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.